This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
And here we are, once again, the Hard-Traveling Fanboys, coming at you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Greg Phillips. With me as always even, is my cohort, Nick Duke. Nick, say hi to the people out there in podcast land.
Hi to the people out there in podcast land.
That's exactly what I wanted to say. And the show has reached a new low. Now,
I don't know, is it possible to reach lower than last week's discussions on animal fucking and...
we're trying to... that's a thing of the past. Last week's podcast is in the past, and that's for our more mature readers. And by readers, I mean listeners.
We've moved out of the preacher era into the era of ruthless aggression.
That's right. It's time. We need somebody to come out here in neon green shorts and grab this podcast by the gonads and bring us into a new era, kicking and screaming, an era in which ratings and buy rates will plummet. But that's neither here nor there. You see, originally we were going to regale you with a very timely edition of Off the Page. As you may know, Off the Page is our monthly podcast where we discuss a movie, a TV show, a game, anything that's related to comics that isn't an actual comic. In this case, we were going to actually review the 2000 Bryan Singer directed film X-Men, which would have been timely since, as of the time of this recording, X-Men Apocalypse has just opened in the box office this previous weekend. However, a little something happened last week that kind of changed our game plan a little bit, and that would be the release of DC Universe Rebirth #1, written by Geoff Johns and drawn by a litany of artists. This is something of not a reboot, but a true rebirth in some ways of the DC Universe superhero line. This was such a big event. It sold out at my comic shop. It's sold out at comic shops around the country, and it's got a lot of people talking. It's got us talking, and we just thought it would be prudent to call an audible here and kick the X-Men review down the line a little bit and go ahead and give you our thoughts, our in-depth thoughts on Rebirth. And yes, our thoughts are so in-depth that this required an entire episode. Nick, tell them about our thought process going into this.
Well, also, let's not forget that you also had Justice League 50 that dropped, which was the finale of Darkseid War. So that was a big, highly anticipated issue. I know there was a lot of hype behind Superman 52, which you read, but I did not read, and we'll talk about that as well. But also, it was kind of like a perfect storm of events because this week also saw the season finales of both Flash and Arrow, which are the two shows we most predominantly discuss during our what we're watching segment. So we got a lot to discuss today, even though we're not doing one of our normal topics. We actually have so much to discuss that for a variety of reasons, we're not even going to get into. Greg has actually seen the film X-Men Apocalypse, and we're going to push that little mini review to next week's episode for, so this one isn't overstuffed, and also because I haven't seen it yet, so I can't talk about it. So that'll be something to look back for next week. But yeah, huge week in the week of comic books and comic book related media, and we just felt like we couldn't contain ourselves in a timely manner. So we just let it explode.
Importantly, since this is our entire episode dedicated to comics and television, we won't be doing the typical reading and watching segment because that's the point of this entire episode. It's one giant reading-watching segment. So that gives all of you musicians out there yet another week to come up with a jingle for us for our reading and watching segment. We'll be waiting and we'll be watching.
And we should also throw up front that because we are reacting in such in-depth fashion to these things that have happened over the last week, there will be spoilers practically throughout the entire episode. So if you haven't read Superman 52, Justice League 50, or DC Universe Rebirth 1, or if you haven't seen the season finales for Flash or Arrow, probably a good time to just move past this one on the old
podcast. Download the podcast. Keep it warm, and then when you've seen and read all these things, at least the ones that you're interested in, then fire it up and listen to it. But yeah, definitely spoiler territory. I don't like doing reviews where we give spoilers of everything, but in this case, this is not so much a review of the book, which I'm sure we'll mention our thoughts on it as well. It'll also be talking about the ramifications of these books and what they'll mean heading forward for this particular comic book universe.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of different directions they can go coming out of this, and not so much in a plot fashion, but just in a general tone and approach fashion as well. So we'll talk a lot about that. So with that being said, before we jump into the meat of DC Universe Rebirth, if you were to pick up a copy of Rebirth right now and open it up to the very first page, you'll see a little notation at the bottom that says, this issue takes place after the events of Justice League 50 and Superman number 52. So, with that in mind, why don't we touch on those a little bit, and we'll start with Superman 52, something that Greg read, but I did not read. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that book. I haven't read an issue of Superman since Geoff Johns left the book, over a year ago now?
Same here. Yeah, and I didn't even finish up Geoff Johns' run on Superman, not because I didn't like it. I did like it, but I had an issue where I wasn't able to keep pulling it for some reason on my list. So it's something that I haven't read in a long time either. I've kept up kind of in an ancillary way through websites and spoilers and things of that nature of what's been actually going on in the books. But this is the first Superman book that I've bought in, well over a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And it was pretty good. It was written by Peter Tomasi. To be honest, I'm not staring at the book right now, so I can't remember exactly who drew it. But it was a solid book. It was kind of threw you in the middle of the action. It was the last part of a multi-part storyline called The Final Days of Superman. And we're thrown into the middle of this big battle between New 52 Superman and this red glowing creature that thinks it's Superman. Apparently it's some guy who had encountered at some point the New 52 Superman, and he got some experiment done to him, and now he's this flaming creature thing. And at the same time, this issue also features the first and apparently only meeting of New 52 Superman and pre-Flashpoint Superman.
All right, so we should probably pause there for those who haven't been keeping up, that much. So last year during their annual, each of the big two has an annual crossover event every summer. Last year's was an event for DC called Convergence, in which we were revisiting heroes of various bygone eras, if you will. And one of those eras that we visited was the 90s Superman. The Superman that existed before the events of Flashpoint erased what we had thought had been erased was the DC Universe from, I'd say, 1985 up through about 2011. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. 85 to 2011.
And so one of the plot devices of Convergence is that this version of Superman was one of the few heroes who was allowed to move over into current continuity. So for the last year or so, you've actually had New 52 Superman and what most people are calling pre-Flashpoint Superman to signify that he is the Superman that existed in the 90s before the event Flashpoint resulted in the creation of the New 52. Or did it? As we'll touch on in a little bit.
Yes. So this book kind of is, again, we're in spoiler territory here, but this book literally is the death of Superman. It's the death of the New 52 Superman. He has this big battle with the orange creature, and as the orange guy is about to go supernova, Superman flies him out into space. He explodes. Superman's cells have been overcharged with, I believe, kryptonite and also this extra solar energy stuff, and so he falls down to Earth, and there's these really good scenes where he gets to say goodbye to the people that matter most to him, which in a weird way, and I'm sure this wasn't intentional, but it actually kind of reminded me of why I didn't like New 52 Superman, because the people that he has surrounding him, no Jimmy, no Perry White, but there is Lana Lang, who got a big story arc in Action Comics with Greg Pak writing it. She's there, and I don't really have any connection to her really. Lois is there and literally utters about 2 words to Superman as he's dying. And because, let's face it, New 52 Lois has been vastly underutilized and not characterized in a way that I would consider consistent with the Lois that I know and love.
And it's had very little to do with Superman. Like, I mean,
right.
You know, honestly, you know, if you're making a list of the most important characters, the most important people to the New 52 Superman, Lois Lane probably isn't on that list. So, you know, it makes some sense why.
Lana is way higher on the list than Lois.
As is Diana, who I'm sure you'll talk about in just a second.
Yes. And then it gets to the parts that actually were really good, and that was his goodbyes to Batman and Wonder Woman. His goodbye to Batman was actually really cool because it was kind of this moment almost out of the animated series Justice League, where Batman in the cartoon, Batman is talking to a statue of Superman and telling him how much he always respected him and that he was always the best of them. And he actually says those words to New 52 Superman as he's dying, which is kind of cool. And then he has a very tearful, heartfelt goodbye with Diana. And then he vaporizes. He doesn't really vaporize, but his body turns to ash or dust or whatever, and he's dead. And that's that. So it was okay. It was a solid book. Honestly, I don't think it was essential to reading Rebirth, but it did at least give you the background that he is dead and that pre-52 Superman or pre-Flashpoint Superman is gonna have a heavy hand in the new universe or whatever in this universe going forward. What I'll call him Real Clark is alive and New 52 Clark is dead. So that was Superman 52. Again, solid book. I wouldn't go out of my way to read it, but it was solid.
Yeah. And from what we understand, or from what everybody has been able to tell, the Superman going forward is going to be the pre-Flashpoint Superman, the Superman of the 90s, if you will. So
that's right, the Superman who has been starring in the Lois and Clark book by Dan Jurgens and Lee Weeks since last year, which has been really good. It's an excellent miniseries. It's actually probably been my favorite book over the last several months. So, I'm pretty happy to see him sticking around.
Well, but the thing about that, though, is I'm sure that going with him as the dominant version of Superman going forward is a move that's probably doomed to fail, seeing as how he's married, and nobody wants to read anything about married characters in comics, from what I understand.
That's correct.
So I've been told by the powers that be over the last few years, anyway.
That's right. They've actually already announced that the Superman title is being canceled in October and replaced with something they actually acquired from Marvel, which is Death's Head 4. So look for that series coming in October.
What happened to Death's Head 3?
Death's Head 3 actually happened in the mid-2000s, apparently. I learned on Wikipedia the other day.
Shows how much I know about the Death's Head mythos.
It's truly one of the more complex and engaging mythos in all of comics.
I can understand that. But in all seriousness, so reading the last issue of New 52 Superman, does that fire you up to pick up some Superman stuff going forward, or is that more a product of Rebirth, as we'll touch on in a minute? It's
more a product of Rebirth, honestly. Like, if I hadn't been reading Lois and Clark, I wouldn't have known what to make of the end of Superman 52. But reading Lois and Clark and reading interviews and knowing that quote-unquote my Superman is going to be the Superman going forward is pretty exciting for me. So already, before I ever picked up Rebirth, I had already added all the main Superman books to my list, my collector list over the summer. So I'm really looking forward to all of the Superman titles pretty much, with a few exceptions that we'll get into later. But I'm really looking forward to Action and Superman in particular.
Right. And then I think you're also interested in Super Sons and...
Super Sons, yes.
What about Supergirl and New Superman?
Supergirl I'm interested in as well. New Superman, not so much, because I don't really understand the point, I guess. But I am interested in Supergirl to see. Apparently they're going to take it more in line with the version of the character that is seen on television, which is more of the traditional take on Supergirl. The one in the New 52, from the little that I read and encountered, was very angsty and very
Angry.
Very angry. Yeah, all the time about a variety of things. So I think it'll be neat to see Kara taken back in more of a traditional take on the character.
I think I'm missing one too. Isn't there a Superwoman book?
There's a Superwoman book, and that is very interesting to me because I think that's going to be the new 52 Lois, because there is a scene in Superman number 52 that Russell actually discussed on his podcast recently, that there is when Superman dies, new 52 Superman dies, there's these two beams of energy that are drawn going out of his body and into Lana Lang and Lois. And there's no other explanation given. So I can only assume that that's going to be the basis of this Superwoman, is that's going to be New 52 Lois, and somehow Lana will be connected to her. I don't know how, but that seems to be the indication going forward.
Interesting. Is Superboy getting a solo title?
Ooh, I don't know, actually. I haven't heard that. I know he's going to be in Super Sons, but I don't think he will, because one of the main points of the Superman book, and one of the reasons I think that you'll enjoy that one if you read it, is Superman is going to be very much about the father-son dynamic, about Clark raising John. So Superboy is almost going to be a main supporting character in that book.
Yes, and for those who may not be aware or haven't been keeping up, this is a Superman who is not only still married to Lois from the 90s, but also they are raising a son together, Jonathan Kent, or John Kent as he's called. I'm assuming still named after.
Yeah, named after Pa.
Named after old Pa. So.
Yep. And he's been one of the great parts about Lois and Clark, the book. John Kent has been a really fun character from the get-go. He's going to be really interesting going forward. Especially, I'm interested in seeing him interact with Damian in the Super Sons book when that drops in the fall. That should be really fun.
Yes, Damian typically a more surly, tough to get along with character than what I'm imagining the son of Superman would be.
Yeah, John is more like he's very excited and just about life in general. He's very excited. He's a typical kid. He also gets himself into a lot of trouble because he pretty much dives in head first to everything and does everything his parents tell him not to do. So
right. So that's Superman 52. Also, before Rebirth, you were advised to have read Justice League 50, which I think you and I both were already pretty excited for anyway, because it was the big finale to Darkseid War, which is the storyline that really, for about a year now, has been taking over the Justice League title. There have been some delays in there, and they also did some one-shots to fill some time. So I think it actually has been close to a calendar year that we've been doing Darkseid War now. So we've both read this one, so I'll be a little bit more active in the discussion here. What were your thoughts on the way they wrapped that storyline up? I got to say, personally, I was a big fan. Loved everything about it, mostly. Had to actually explain it to one of my coworkers who was so excited for Rebirth that was his first book he had read in a while in the main DCU, and so he was asking me all kinds of crazy questions like, why is Lois Lane giving birth to a baby Darkseid and all these other things, and I was like, well, you got to understand, first of all, that's the Lois from Earth. From Earth 3.
You see, in the beginning, there was the Monitor, and then there was the Anti-Monitor, and
then he fell asleep. My coworker did right there as I was explaining the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor and all those,
Yeah, admittedly, this is a book that is, I think we discussed this the other day, one of the most because comics things you'll ever read.
Yes.
Why is Darkseid a baby? Because comics.
Why is Superman glowing white? Because comics.
That's comics. Actually, he inherited the powers of the New Gods.
Why is Lex Luthor doing what appears to be a bad Darkseid cosplay? Because comics.
Because comics. But no, I'm totally with you, man. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I think that this definitely cemented itself as the best of the Geoff Johns Justice League stories, even over Throne of Atlantis. And I think that it may go down as, outside of Snyder and Capullo, one of the best New 52 stories, period. And it's ironic because it comes at the very end of the New 52. But yeah, what a way to go out, because it was from beginning to end consistently engaging. And like I talked about a few podcasts ago, it really felt like it built, like it was building to a head, and that finale really felt like a true finale.
Right.
Like there were the conflict was settled, but it didn't, because it's comics, nothing is ever truly settled. And so Geoff Johns did what he is so masterful at and set the stage for what's coming next.
Yes,
for all these
ended one period and set the stage for what's coming next. Like you and I discussed offline, it felt a lot to me like his Green Lantern 20, which had the ending to the natural story. And yes, his Green Lantern 20 gave the characters some version of permanent endings, but this, at the conclusion of the main story, gave each character kind of a little coda as to where this character goes from here. Batman's got a huge mystery to investigate going forward. Wonder Woman has a mystery to investigate going forward. As we know now, New 52 Superman is dead. The Flash has got some stuff to work out. The Green Lanterns have some stuff to work out. So, very interesting directions for each character moving forward. And I would have to say, of those directions, I think you and I are probably largely in agreement that the two most interesting are Batman and Wonder Woman. So which one of those do you want to tackle first?
I think we should go... Let's do Batman first, because I think Wonder Woman was ultimately the main character of Darkseid War.
I would agree with that.
And I think we should probably address that last. Let's go ahead and talk about what's going on with old Betsy.
Okay, so in the course of the story, one of the conceits of the story was that various members of the Justice League were finding ways to be imbued with the power of various new gods, whether it was through taking that power directly or through the death of new gods, and then the League members becoming the new hosts. Batman's direction was that he wound up taking the Mobius chair from Metron. And that chair essentially is the chair of all knowledge. That's the way I understand it anyway. And so Batman used this chair to reveal to him one of the greatest secrets in all of the Batman mythos of, he asked the chair directly, who is the Joker? What is the Joker's real name? And the response he got, as revealed in this issue, was probably not what we were expecting, I would say.
Yeah, we were expecting, and I think everybody was expecting, a name to the Joker, which, quite frankly, I'll be the first to admit, I had a lot of hesitation for. I think you did as well. I was concerned about revealing...
If anybody was going to write it, I would want it to be Geoff Johns. That's the best way.
Yes, I agree with that. If anybody was going to do it, I'd want it to be Geoff, but I was very hesitant about it. Now, of course, we should have known better, because instead of actually revealing the Joker's identity per se, the secret is actually much more interesting than that. Because the secret that the Mobius chair tells Batman is that the Joker doesn't have an identity, because there are actually 3 Jokers. So Batman does not know who the Joker is, but now he knows that there are 3 Jokers existing simultaneously, which was one of the biggest, if not for Rebirth, it would have been the biggest mind screw of last week, I would say, in the world of comics. It was such a huge reveal, and it's a shame it's almost been buried because of all the crazy stuff in Rebirth, but it's a really interesting reveal, and I think that it's going to go a long way towards what Geoff has described as wanting to make everything count in the past. So you can have these... It allows you to account for the different takes on the Joker. The Joker that's happy just robbing banks and playing practical jokes. The Joker who was around for the 90s and the 2000s. And then the Joker that appeared in Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's Batman run, who's more of a, I would say, a psycho serial killer type Joker. It's going to be very interesting to see how they play this out, what it means in the long run. What did you make of this? You're an even bigger Batman fan than I am, Nick. What did you make of all this when you read it?
It was an interesting reveal. I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and wait to see how it plays out. My thought is that it probably has something to do with the compression of various timelines created by the events of, Flashpoint and some things that were revealed in Rebirth. So I am guessing it doesn't actually mean that 3 different people from the New 52 somehow became the Joker. I'm guessing that it's 3 different Jokers that have been compressed onto one Earth, if that makes sense. That's where I think it's going. But I've certainly been wrong before, and I'm interested to see how that story plays out going forward, and more importantly, who gets to tell that story going forward. Because it's important to remember, Geoff Johns not going to be writing any comics for a little while. Scott Snyder has kind of stepped away as the lead Batman writer, so to speak. So, how and when and if that story gets paid off, I'm very interested to see in whose hands they put that story.
And will it be told within the next year? within the next 2 years? Because Geoff Johns has said that he is going to return at some point, and that this long-form story that started in Rebirth will play out over the course of 2 years. Is this something we're going to have to wait until then to find out? Or is it something that they're going to get to in the near future in the Batman titles by particularly the main title by Tom King?
Right. No one knows. No one really knows what the long-term shape of DC editorial looks like going forward. So it's interesting to see how that plays out. But I'm always going to be interested in Batman. So this just adds another wrinkle to investigate going forward. But go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's kind of sets up something else from Justice League 50, the big reveal for Wonder Woman that we were just referring to. As anybody that's read Darkseid War knows, Wonder Woman is the main narrator throughout. She is the primary focal point character of this story, which is really cool because previous stories have had other members of the League as kind of the focal point character.
And they even provide like her polar opposite. Like every superhero has their inverse, as a villain at some point, as in one of their villains. And they provide that for Wonder Woman here with a character known as Grail, who was another Amazonian who was born on the island the same night as Wonder Woman. The
same night as Diana.
The catch is, instead of Zeus being the father, Darkseid is Grail's father. So, and you kind of have her as the main, I would argue, the main antagonist of the story, because Darkseid and the Anti-Monitor really were being pitted against each other through her manipulation, rather than being the direct threats here.
Exactly. Now, the big reveal at the end of Justice League 50 is that Grail's mother tells Diana something that we later hear from Grail herself, which is that the same night that Grail was born and Diana was born, Hippolyta, Diana's mother, for those who don't know, actually gave birth just seconds after Diana to a boy, Diana's twin brother. Now, this boy is born and was the first male to ever set foot on Themyscira, which is the main point of the Darkseid War, is Grail is trying to find what she calls the Chosen One, who she thinks is Steve Trevor, but it's actually not. It's Wonder Woman's mysterious twin. Now, they're not sure that this twin is alive, but, I mean, come on, he's alive. So, the twin, all we know about him is that he's named Jason. And is that correct? Jason, I think was his name.
That was the name they gave.
Yep. That's all we know. And Diana finds this out at the end of the book. And that is going to serve as or appears to be serving as the focal point for the upcoming Wonder Woman series by Greg Rucka, Liam Sharp, and Nicola Scott, that is going to follow Diana's quest for this brother of hers.
And it actually makes a lot more sense, because one of the things so these books for DC that are shipping twice a month with alternating artists, most books, I think all of the books except for Wonder Woman, are telling a single story, and the artists are just going to take turns doing issues. Rucka's approach is he's actually going to tell present day stories and flashback stories every other issue, and use a particular artist for each one. So since this mystery is so rooted in Diana's childhood and the early days, days gone by of Themyscira, it makes a lot of sense the way he's structuring the book now, if you see what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, no, it's. I thought it was one of the coolest reveals, and it gives you instantly a hook to get people interested in Wonder Woman's solo title. Because I'll be honest with you, I've never consistently bought a Wonder Woman solo title. I would occasionally pick up single issues, usually when they tied into stories that I was reading in Superman or Batman or Justice League or whatever. This is the first time in a while since the New 52, because I really wanted to get into the Brian Azzarello run on Wonder Woman, but I just never did. This has given me a chance, and I've already added it to my pull list, so to speak. And I'm really excited.
I mean, you and I were both going to jump on board the second Greg Rucka's name was announced, essentially.
Right. And this this hook is really intriguing to me, because this can give you instantly another mega villain for Diana, or even another mega ally and supporting character for Diana, since she's already got Grail, who I think, would you agree that Grail is most likely going to be a Wonder Woman villain going forward?
That would make the most sense to me, depending on how the whole deal. But another thing we got to talk about is one of the plot devices of this is that Grail ends up with a child who also happens to be Darkseid, who also happens to be her father. By
yes,
the book.
It is the reincarnation. It is the reincarnation of Darkseid through the body of Superwoman's child that she was carrying at the end of Forever Evil.
Superwoman,
who turns out to not right. Who turns out to not be who turns out to not be Ultraman or Owlman's kid. It turns out to be the kid of the evil version of Shazam from Earth 3, which makes him the most powerful.
Alexander Luthor Jr., essentially.
Exactly. And so through comics magic, Grail reincarnates Darkseid through this baby and is now raising it as her own, essentially. So it's quite a situation she finds herself in. One that I'm sure Mr. Mark Millar is sitting back home in Scotland stroking his chin about, incestuous baby Darkseid, eh? But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, very interested to see where she goes, where she winds up going forward. But I would assume, she'll probably pop up in a Justice League or an event title first before moving on to become a regular featured Wonder Woman villain. So, but the book also set up, finally, I think, something we all knew was coming, in that it took Power Ring, Jessica Cruz, a character who had been infected with the evil version of the Green Lantern ring from Earth 3, and finally made her a full-fledged Green Lantern by the end of this book. So that also sets the status quo for the book Green Lanterns going forward, which is going to be her and Simon Baz teaming up to defend Sector 2814. So I think you and I were both also very pleased with the Green Lantern related developments in this book, especially a scene I know you want to talk about.
Yes. Well, real quick on Jessica, the significance of this for those that don't regularly follow Green Lantern is that Jessica Cruz is now the first ever human female Green Lantern that there's ever been in the history of the Corps, which is a pretty landmark event, given that there have been so many different Green Lanterns over the years. So that's pretty cool. But the moment that Nick's referring to and the scenes that he's referring to, and I said this on Twitter last week, in my opinion, the Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern that we see in Justice League number 50, this is the real Hal Jordan. This is the first time in about 3 years, and I don't want to bury everything that's happened since then, but I'll say this specifically about Hal Jordan. It is the most heroic and the most accurate that Hal Jordan has been written since Geoff Johns left Green Lantern in 2013. This is a Hal Jordan who is brave in the face of danger, who is smart, who figures things out, who has his personality, has his humor, but he's a Hal Jordan who, when push comes to shove, he's the guy that you want out there because he's going to do what it takes no matter what the cost to himself. This is a comic that has, of all people, it's an inversion of what DC usually does, where Batman saves the day for everybody. In this case, it's Hal Jordan who saves Batman's life by voluntarily giving up his Green Lantern ring to help Batman break away from the Mobius chair. To the point where at the end of the book, and this is just brilliant framing and why I think it's one of the best issues of Justice League that Johns has written, there's a callback to the very first issue of Justice League where Batman, when he meets Green Lantern, says that Hal isn't the hero, the ring is the hero. Well, in this callback to that issue, at the very end, Hal goes to check on Batman in the cave, and Bruce stops him and says, "For the record, I was wrong. The ring was never the hero." And to me, that made the hair stand up on my arm, because it's been so long since I've read a Hal Jordan that I recognized. A Hal Jordan that wasn't just a generic character, but a true hero that deserves to stand alongside Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, and all these other great heroes. So I don't know about you, Nick, but for a Green Lantern fan like me, it was just wonderful to see Geoff get to write Hal in that kind of a situation again, because it's been way too long.
It has, and even not just him leaving, the Green Lantern title, but Hal also took a pretty long sabbatical from the Justice League book as well. He just popped up, I want to say, at the beginning of Darkseid War, made his return or something like that. So he hadn't been around.
Right before. Yeah.
Hadn't been around much lately. So it was really cool to see Geoff Johns writing that character again. And nobody writes Hal like Geoff Johns writes Hal, and it just makes me, pine for those days. And I'm like you. I don't want to bury the current Hal Jordan run, but it just it makes me long for better days. But I'm gonna keep with it and hope that with Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps coming up, that maybe Robert Venditti will finally find a way to make that character more akin to the character that you and I fell in love with all those years ago.
Let's make Hal Jordan great again.
Bob Backlund could do it.
It would only take him a few segments every week, actually.
That's right.
Just one segment, in fact. But that all that being said, these were all the great things that happened in Justice League 50. There was other great moments as well for other characters, but I feel like we hit the high points of that. So all of that sets up what we see in DC Universe Rebirth #1. Now, I would put this on a short list of the most surprising comics that I've read in terms of shockers that actually shocked me. And I would also put it up there with some of the better single issues that I've read in a long time. It was very reminiscent, as you said a minute ago, of Green Lantern #20, which was Geoff Johns' finale to the Green Lantern universe. But this perhaps was not quite to that level, but it was, in my eyes anyway, but it was pretty close. It was Geoff Johns at his absolute best as a writer. And what about this team of artists? I'm just going to name off the artists that drew different parts of this. Gary Frank, Ethan Van Sciver, Ivan Rice, Phil Jimenez. I mean, that's an all-star team of pencilers. And then you've got guys like Brad Anderson on colors. You've got Joe Prado inking. You've got Hi-Fi doing colors as well. This was an all-star art team, and it felt like Geoff Johns was putting every piece of his soul onto this page, every bit of energy that he has as a comic book fan in what will end up being his finale as a comic book writer for a while anyway, while he goes off
for at least 2 years, according to him.
He's going off, as we all know, to go and help with the DC film universe. And I got to say, if this is his last hurrah, he went out with a grand slam. Absolutely,
couldn't agree more. I mean, it was simultaneously heart-wrenching, heartwarming, shocking. Everything you wanted it to be, and it hit every emotional note it was going for perfectly. Because that's another thing to remember. This is an 80-page book where I don't believe a single punch is ever thrown, to my knowledge anyway. So if you're looking for superhero action, if you're looking for, the Justice League going out and punching evil right in its face, that's not what we got here. This was a story more concerned with the emotional and moral heart of the DC universe as a whole.
This was about characters.
Right.
This was about characters and relationships. And I think that's something that Geoff sought to do with this book, is to restore some semblance of that to the DC universe. And I don't even know where to begin with this. I almost feel like before we begin on this book, we need to kind of set the stage for what this book is a reaction to. In 2011, DC Comics had the Flashpoint event, in which Barry Allen went back in time, stopped his mother from being killed by Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash, and in the process set in motion a world where everything was different and everything was much worse. He ended up fixing it, but when he fixed it, not everything got back the way it was supposed to, and so we got this new universe born out of it. Now, when that happened, this was highly controversial. It caused a lot of hand-wringing. It brought a lot of new readers in. It also drove a lot of old readers out.
So basically, DC used the ending of Flashpoint as an impetus to reboot the entire universe. They wiped away, or we were told they wiped away all the old continuity, and we were relaunched in September 2011 with 52 new #1 issues, and an environment which we were told these heroes have been active for about 5 years, and here is superheroism in the DC Universe 5 years after it was first introduced, and we're going to tell those stories going forward.
And in the process, of course, along the way, you had things like Grant Morrison's Action Comics that was telling Superman's new origin. Zero Year happened by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, which told a new version of Batman's, or more Gotham City's origin, I guess you would say, the origin of the Bat mythos, if you will. But there were several books that came out of this that were critically acclaimed. The aforementioned Snyder and Capullo Batman, the Geoff Johns tenure on Justice League, Aquaman by Geoff Johns and Ivan Reis, which completely redefined that character for a new generation.
The Jeff Lemire Green Arrow, as we discussed a few episodes
Jeff back. Green Arrow, Swamp Thing and Animal Man were good. Wonder Woman was highly acclaimed when it was written by Azzarello and Chang. So there were a lot of great things to come out of this. Now, there were also a lot of bad things to come out of this. And in the process of Morrison writing his Action Comics run, which was pretty well received, the problem was he was defining the new origin of Superman for this new universe, and there was apparently no communication going on editorially with the people that were writing and creating the Superman book, which was supposed to be taking place in modern times, 5 years after Superman has gone public. So this created a problem where the writers were hamstrung because they were working with a character that they didn't know. They didn't know what his building blocks were and his foundation was. And so because of all this editorial confusion, Superman in the New 52 was something of a mess, with each creative team kind of doing their own thing, and nothing really stuck long term, with a few exceptions here and there.
Well, not just that, but you also have, in addition to characters whose histories were muddled, you had characters who seemingly didn't exist at all. For example, going back to the 5-year timeline that we discussed, so the Flash has been active for 5 years, meaning that an adult Wally West, who for many people was their Flash, there was no way for him to exist if this new Barry Allen had only existed for 5 years. You were either going to get a back to, young, early teens Wally West, or, conversely, no Wally West at all, which is what we got for a long time in the New 52. No Wally West for those people like yourself who recognized the Flash largely for the Wally West years, or characters like Donna Troy, that weren't there and hadn't been there for a long time. Characters like Ted Kord, the Blue Beetle, not there. Even with the Batman mythos, it got kind of wonky at times in that we were still led to believe that all the Robins, the 4 main Robins, Dick Grayson, Jason Todd, Tim Drake, and Damian Wayne, had all been Robins. Yet,
in the course of 5 years.
In the course of 5 years. So it compressed a lot of things, and it caused a lot of issues when I think originally the idea was to simplify things.
Exactly. The idea was to simplify, and I think that perhaps it would have worked better if DC had just thrown out the baby with the bathwater, because in terms of Green Lantern was left intact and Batman was left mostly intact, but in order for them to be intact, there cannot be the 5-year artificial window. So things were just kind of left unexplained as far as what happened in the past, what didn't happen in the past. Geoff Johns' Green Lantern run was allowed to play out to its finale, which took about 2 years into the New 52. Batman maintained most of his his continuity, if you will. But again, it caused a lot of problems. It caused a lot of issues. And making things worse were editorial mandates, allegedly. But this is coming out of interviews with prominent creators, including Geoff Johns. Editorial mandates that called for, and I'll get to the first one that comes to mind because it's the most, I think, the one that pisses you off the most, I think. There was an idea that in addition, well, actually, number one, to make all these characters younger because people can't relate to older heroes, which is a big issue because I don't buy that for a second that people can't relate to older heroes, which is one of the mandates of the New 52. So they de-aged these heroes and they compressed the timeline, which also meant, by the way, that there was no Justice Society because there was no golden age of heroes. The very first generation of heroes, we were told, is the Justice League, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, etc. So you've wiped out a bunch of characters that mean a lot to a lot of people. And most importantly, I think, to you, Nick, and to a degree to me as well, the other mandate that was passed down editorially is that comic book readers can't relate to relationships. So all the marriages had to be undone. Nobody was married. All the characters were single.
Wait, I think there was one exception to that, to their credit. I believe, wasn't Buddy Baker allowed to keep his marriage?
I think so. I think so. I can't remember, to be honest with you.
In the pages of Animal Man, I'm pretty sure they allowed him to keep that.
Which is an ancillary title. But your major characters, your Clark Kent is no longer married to Lois. Not only that, he's not even dating Lois.
Aquaman and Mira.
Aquaman and Mira no longer married, although Geoff Johns pretty much just ignored that in his book, in his run on the character. He acted like they were married even though they weren't technically. Obviously, Wally doesn't exist, so Wally and Linda are gone. Barry and Iris are no longer married. In fact, they're not dating either. You basically had the entire universe that was once filled with interpersonal relationships. Green Arrow and Black Canary, another example, no longer married. A whole universe full of these couples, these relationships that form the backbone of what people think of as the DC Universe. It made it unique, made it stand out in some ways from Marvel. And they're all gone. And all of these things that were taken away in the New 52, in my opinion, made the New 52 seem like it wasn't really the DC Universe in some ways. For all the great stories that we did get out of it, there were certain characters that never quite felt right. Superboy, for instance, was changed. Supergirl was changed. A lot of these characters were transformed in ways that didn't make them feel like they were the same characters. And losing those relationships made me lose my connection with a lot of these characters, because seeing how Superman balanced being the most important superhero of all with trying to maintain a marriage, that was compelling to me. Seeing the love between Barry and Iris, that was compelling to me.
If the idea of superheroes is to be aspirational in nature, then I think it's important that you have that positive relationship. I'm not saying every character needs to be happily married, but I mean, if we're in an era where the argument is there should be a superhero for everyone, and that there should be a character who at least reminds the reader of themselves for every demographic that's out there, then the same needs to be there for, the happily committed, stable relationship. And that wasn't there for a long time. And it may sound like, a complaint to say, oh, these relationships that I once knew and loved are gone, and I just don't like to see things change, and I want things back the way they were. Well, it wasn't just that, because they also, in the process of having this mandate, drove off, a couple of notable creators. I think the most notable example would be J.H. Williams, correct? On Batwoman.
That's correct, yes. J.H. Williams wanted to have Batwoman get married in the pages of that comic.
Kane and Maggie Sawyer were going to get married. And it wasn't going to be a publicity grab. It was something that he had built to in the course of his story over a couple of years. And was told no, because they just have a blanket, or had a blanket opposition to marriage in the pages of their books, for whatever reason.
Yep. Which is just wrong-headed, for lack of a better term, completely wrong-headed. The same way that dictating that every character has to be married would be wrong-headed. It's limiting. It's not fair to the creators. It's not fair to the fans. And it's not fair to the previous creators who set these things in place to just do away with them. Unless it's part of a completely start from scratch kind of showing these stories like the Ultimate Universe or something like that. But that wasn't what this was. This was trying to have their cake and eat it too. And that sets the stage for what we have in Rebirth, because Rebirth is, first of all, it is a response to the things that were lost amidst the good things in the New 52. It's a response to the love that was taken out. It's a response to the darkening of a lot of these characters. It's a response to the loss of identity in some ways of the DC Universe. And from page 1, it becomes clear that that's what it is, because sometimes it's not clear if you're reading Wally West or if you're reading Geoff Johns as himself.
Well, just one thing we need to mention also is you said it right there. So we're in spoiler territory, obviously. Wally West, and we don't mean, the younger teenage African American Wally West that has appeared in the pages of the Flash in recent months. We are talking about Wally West, the actual real Wally West, the Wally West that people knew and grew up with, the Wally West that was allowed to age from being Kid Flash into becoming a man of his own, the Wally West that provided you with an idea of what the family dynamic could look like in a superhero title. That Wally
the
West,
ultimate generational legacy character,
yes,
Wally West,
is absolutely back in Rebirth.
Yep. He is the main character. He is the narrator. He is the eyes of the reader throughout this book. And he is Geoff Johns' proxy. When you read lines such as "What have we lost along the way?" I look down at it and know without question I love this world, but there's something missing. And this is something interesting that I found, Nick, that I was just earlier today reading my Absolute edition of Green Lantern Rebirth, and for our upcoming long book hunters on it, and I found a line in there that is basically the same line. It's a complete mirror of that line, where John Stewart is staring up at Guy Gardner's gallery of Green Lantern costumes, and they're discussing Hal Jordan's legacy, and Guy is talking about how things are great, and he actually says, but without Hal, there's something missing. And that's such an interesting mirror for this Rebirth that's more than 10 years after that. This kind of doing the same thing for the entire DC Universe that Rebirth was doing for the Green Lantern mythos.
Well, much like Green Lantern Rebirth way back then, the point was never to erase what had happened. The point was to restore Hal Jordan to a place of prominence. Geoff Johns was never seeking to get rid of Kyle Rayner. He was never seeking to tell fans who had bonded with Kyle Rayner over that decade-long period that their favorite character didn't matter. He was simply seeking to find a way for all fans to have their characters, to have those characters that they love so dearly. And this is the same thing with Rebirth. It was an attempt, and I won't even say an attempt, it was an absolute success at reintegrating concepts, characters, relationships, themes, ideas that the DC Universe frankly was built upon, and that the New 52 strayed away from.
Agreed. And again, it's not a situation. Wally is the main character in this story, but this is not Wally replacing Barry. This is Wally returning to live alongside Barry. This is, like you said, in Green Lantern Rebirth, bringing Hal back, but bringing back the Green Lantern core concept. What this is doing is bringing Wally back and bringing back this missing time that was gone, as they explain here in the book. This period of time and maturation and growth is missing in the DC Universe, and this is a chance to bring that back, because a lot of the characters in the New 52 were angsty and because they were younger. They were angsty, they were temperamental, they were, sort of, I guess, teenage slanted versions of the previous characters, younger slanted versions anyway. And this is definitely a step towards restoring some of the maturity, some of the emotion, some of the love, as it actually explicitly states in here. Love is what's been missing, and this is bringing love back to the DC Universe, and not in terms of just relationships, but in terms of the interplay between the characters, in terms of the presentation of superheroes in general as being a little bit more on the team-up side instead of the antagonism side. And it's, as you see throughout this book, Johns and these artists weave this story of Wally traveling through the Speed Force and literally trying to connect to all of these characters he used to have connections with that he no longer does. And that is the metatextual kind of commentary on the DC Universe, that a lot of these characters that fans had connections to are not necessarily there anymore. And when you see that all of these connections, like for instance, Wally and Linda, in one of the most touching scenes in the book, Wally goes through the Speed Force and finally finds his long-lost wife, Linda. It's a younger version of her, a new 52 version of her that we've never met before. He meets her, and he comes out of the Speed Force. And this is after,
the entire book he has been trying to find her. He's been interacting with other characters, but only because he couldn't find her, because the reason he gives is that in the past, she was always whatever brought him back when he found himself in similar situations. Whenever he was accidentally merged with the Speed Force, or whenever he had disappeared, or whenever he was in trouble, Linda was always there to save him rather than him saving her. So it's a beautiful idea in that, she's not the damsel in distress. In many ways, she was the hero of their story.
Exactly, and always was. And when he finds her, she doesn't even recognize him. And it breaks his heart. And the panels that are drawn there, and I believe that was Ivan Rice that drew that one, it really is touching, and it shows you the pain that he's going through. The book also, in the midst, it's incredible how much I'm thumbing through it now. In addition to Wally's journey through the Speed Force, his interactions with Batman and Linda and all these other characters that he encounters, it's amazing because he also manages to succinctly retell Wally West's origin story in the process.
Right. It's introducing. It is what the idea of rebirth in the DC Universe has come to represent. It is telling a story that is primarily geared towards long-term fans while also opening the door to new readers. And that's what it was. That idea of reintroducing Wally West to a new generation while also welcoming back those who were lapsed readers. That was what the book was intended to do. And it was an unmitigated, unqualified success in that regard, in my opinion.
I completely agree. And before we get into the big reveal at the end and what that means moving forward, what were some of your favorite moments in Rebirth?
The one I'll go to first is the one that I think you kind of figured, or I'll go to the two because they're very similar. There is a scene. So the book is broken down into chapters, and each chapter kind of deals with, I guess, a theme that Geoff Johns feels like the DC Universe has lost. And one of those, as you mentioned, is the idea of love. And you have Wally West talking about, he's realized that, whoever is responsible for this didn't just take hope from them. He took love from the DC Universe. Love was taken away. And then you get scenes of Oliver Queen and the Black Canary separately. And Johns, writes narration in there that says, whenever they see each other and their eyes meet, there's a spark that neither one of them can explain. And they spend nights wondering what they've lost or what's missing in their lives. And you see them each, having their opposite lives, but the implication is that they were always meant to be drawn to one another. And that's just a fantastic idea as a Green Arrow fan. And then, of course, Johns in the ultimate sign that he was clearly ignoring the no marriage mandate, actually has Aquaman propose to Mira on the beach where they first met.
Wonderful scene.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful scene. And those are the two that stuck out to me, the most. There are others. I mean, I've never been a hardcore fan of the Justice Society, so I don't really care about characters like Johnny Thunder. But the Johnny Thunder scene in this book is one of the most heartbreaking things you'll ever read in your life. And I don't know who drew it, but I'm going to assume it was Gary Frank.
Gary Frank.
Simply because of the facial expressions done, and nobody does facial expressions like Gary Frank.
Nope. He's the best.
The terror, the sorrow on the face of what is implied to be roughly 95-year-old Johnny Thunder is just amazing.
I'm looking at the scene right now, and I don't know that I've ever seen like a scared, terrified older person portrayed this realistically in a comic book than this, because I had my great grandmother spent her last several years in a nursing home, and unfortunately I got to know that look pretty well, and the way that Gary Frank draws this is just, it's amazing. And the scene itself, the idea of this guy who knows, he feels that there was something there, but it's not there anymore, and he can't place it, that it's been forgotten, that he's been forgotten, that his whole generation of heroes have been forgotten. And it's just heartbreaking, like you said, a great scene. And for those that to follow up on what Nick just said, for those that don't know, the titles of these chapters are Lost, Chapter 2 is Legacy, Chapter 3 is Love, and Chapter 4 is Life. And I think particularly those middle two, Legacy and Love, are the things that he's seeking to restore, because at the beginning it's showing you what has been lost, then he's showing you why it's important that these things are restored. And those moments you mentioned are certainly standout moments. I don't know anything about Ryan Choi, who apparently was the Atom of the 90s. But
who was the Atom of the mid-2000s. I misspoke during our phone conversation earlier this week. But he was a short-lived version of the Atom.
But yeah, that, as often with these DC Universe Rebirth stories by Geoff Johns, it made me interested in what's coming next. I'll give another shout-out to, I loved the way that they integrated our Wally with the new Wally, because again, they deliberately did not wipe out the new Wally West. The new Wally West is very much still alive and still active. What they did is, and I like this, because yes, it's convoluted, it's comic booky and all that, but I was afraid they were going to do the Wally from Earth, whatever they call the pre-Flashpoint Earth, and this is the Wally of Earth 1 or whatever. And instead, they're both in the same Earth, and they're just related distantly through their families, basically, where they're both named after the same great-grandfather, I believe?
Yes, their great-grandfather was Wallace West.
And they're both named after him. And Wally is the son of one sibling, and our Wally is the son of one sibling, and new Wally is the son of another sibling. And so, yeah, I really liked that. I think that integrated it nicely. And now, to me, that shows the commitment to, again, building legacies and families. That's another thing that hasn't been mentioned a lot, that family was such a big part of the DC Universe. Not even just legacies, but having these characters that were tied together, whether it was Alan Scott, who had Jade and Obsidian, or whether it be the Garricks, the Wests, the Allens. These families of characters were such a big part of the DC Universe, and restoring that and not hiding from it is, in my opinion, it's a strength of DC. And again, it helps to separate DC from the competitors, because each company has its own identity, and I feel like the answer is not to make them more the same. The answer is to accentuate what makes them strong, and that's what this story did. And of course, my favorite scene in the book. It's the scene near the end. It's pretty much the climax of the book. Wally has gone through the Speed Force, and he can't connect with any of these people, even Linda. Nobody remembers him. Nobody can feel the connection with him that he has. And so over the course of the issue, as we see Wally go through these issues, he begins to become okay with the idea of dying, because what's going to happen is he's going to get sucked into the Speed Force and lost forever. And he gains acceptance for that. He gets to the point where he's okay, but he needs to visit one last person, and it's Barry. And he goes and he sees Barry delivering pizza to these people that he just saved, and he sees that Barry is happy and he's healthy, and this guy that inspired him is ready to go on, and Wally is ready to die. And then there's this panel at the very bottom of the page where you see, as Barry is running by, in the corner of his eye, he sees Wally. And then what happens is Wally visits Barry, says his goodbyes to him, and he's about to fade out into the Speed Force, and he says, "Thank you for an amazing life." And as Wally is fading out, Barry reaches out and grabs his hand and remembers and says, "Wally," and he pulls him out of the Speed Force. And then 2 pages later, Phil Jimenez illustrated this entire sequence, and I can honestly say, without shame, this is one of a handful of comic book moments that actually made me shed tears when Barry and Wally embrace after Wally's been saved from the Speed Force, and Barry breaks down crying and says, "How could I ever forget you?" And there's this amazing panel of them hugging, and it's one of the best panels I've ever seen in a comic. One of my all-time favorites instantly. Top 10 for me, all-time favorite pages.
Yeah, it's a great scene. You know, I don't have the emotional connection to Wally and the Flash characters like you do, so I know that hit for you in a big way. But it was an earned moment in the context of the issue as well, because it was all about, you know, the whole issue was about Wally trying to find his place, and it kind of made sense that even above Linda, Barry was the one thing that would never let him go. So that was a cool, beautiful idea. And the issue, you know, really 80 pages, but it's so dense and there's so much going on. It's one of the few single issues in recent years that I actually reread. I read it again this weekend.
Yep.
During my downtime, just because I wanted to re-experience it. And one thing I noticed, the book is so dense that I read this scene, and I remember reading it the first time, but I didn't even recognize what it meant. But that scene with a character called Jackson Hyde, do you remember that scene?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't even register with me the first time around that's called Aram from Young Justice.
Yeah. And he is apparently going to be a new Aqualad.
Yep, going to be in the pages of Aquaman. So just, you know, if I haven't verbally filleted the Dan Abnett Aquaman enough for your taste yet, just wait. It's coming down the road, what with Call to Ram and a potential engagement between Mara and Arthur coming. So stay tuned for that.
Absolutely. And like turning through these pages, you see the tears in Barry's eyes, and it's done so much better than most comics do tear pages, for lack of a better term. When people are crying, it's a weakness of some artists, but Jimenez excels at it. And it's just the whole issue, so many different teases of things to come, whether it be the new Blue Beetle. We didn't even mention that. Ted Kord is back now. And Ted Kord interacting with Jaime Reyes, and both being sort of Blue Beetle in their own way. Very cool. And I don't know if you noticed this as well, but when I read that scene, I found a lot of similarities between the TV version of Ray Palmer and the comic book version of Ted Kord.
Yes, very similar. Very outgoing and very almost youthful in their exuberance.
Yes, goofy almost. Like, for instance, Dr. Fate appears before Ted Kord and warns him of the fact that this scarab that is attached to Jaime Reyes is not technological or alien in nature. It's actually magic. And he says it in a way that's supposed to convey fear. But when you see Ted's face, he just gets this big goofy grin. And it was like, you know, it's awesome. And it also makes the version of Ray Palmer on TV make more sense to me, because I definitely feel that that's kind of a proxy for Ted Kord. Yeah, very, very big fan of that scene. And the whole book is just incredible. You get the big emotional reunion between Wally and Barry, and Wally explains to Barry what's going on. And do you have anything else you want to add about the issue, or should we get to the big reveal?
You know, I think we should probably move to to the big reveal. So throughout the book, Wally is making reference to the fact that people believe that the Flashpoint was responsible for the creation of the New 52, but it wasn't. Someone or something was manipulating the events that caused the creation of the New 52.
That someone, you guessed it, Frank Stallone.
Frank Stallone, absolutely. But throughout the course of the issue, we're being teased with it, and we get a couple of moments where maybe the hand is tipped a little bit, but these spoilers were out there for about a week before the issue hit, and that's my one regret with the way this issue was marketed. There was no need to spoil this reveal. None. But... No. So, Greg, when you finally get to the last 5 pages of the book, take me through your response as a reader when you're reading it.
So, as I'm going through, I'm reading the... Wally is talking to Barry and explaining to Barry that it wasn't his fault that this all happened, basically. And they cut to the cave, and at this point I'm thinking, well, why the hell are they cutting back to Batman? I'm thinking maybe there's some big Joker reveal coming up, because you see Batman, and he walks by a big Joker card that's hanging up in the cave, and he walks by the letter that was written by Thomas Wayne in Flashpoint, which if you haven't read Flashpoint, big moment in that is the Thomas Wayne of the Flashpoint universe writes a letter that Barry then delivers to Bruce, and Bruce has framed in the cave. So Bruce walks by and he reads it, and then he goes down this well of the cave, basically, because he sees something sparkling, I guess. And at this point, I'm completely confused as to what's going on or what the point of this is. I'm like, again, I think it's something Joker-related that's going to set up the next big Batman event. And then you turn over to the last page, and he pulls from the cave itself, he pulls the smiley face pin with a bloodstain on it from Watchmen. The comedian's pin. And at that point, I'm not even making this up, I put the comic book down and I said aloud to no one, I said, holy shit. No one around, just to myself, which is the first sign of insanity. And I was like, I had no idea that was coming. And I have never been so happy in my life to have avoided spoilers.
Yeah, I mean, and it was tough, man. It was tough to avoid those spoilers. They were out there for a long time. So let me take you through my experience with that particular reveal that we've discussed offline. So here we go. So I told you that I was fighting like hell to avoid spoilers. I mean, it was a constant struggle if you were at all active on the internet in the comics world for like that last week. I had already had Wally West spoiled for me, which I didn't really want, but, whatever. And then somebody on some clickbaity article I saw had posted that image of Batman holding up something, but they had conveniently blurred out whatever he was holding. So I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe it was a Two-Face coin or, something related to some part of the Batman mythos. I had no idea what it was. So cut to the afternoon of May 25th when the book is preparing to be released. And I didn't get to go pick up the book until after work, so far behind a lot of people because they did do a midnight release for this issue as well. So I'm many hours behind a lot of people at that time. And so right before I'm about to get off work, our good buddy Todd Weber posts in the Place to Be Nation Facebook comics group that image from Watchmen of the smiley face pin with the blood splatter. And I sit there and I go, wonder why he's posting that. Must be rereading Watchmen. And I don't think anything else of it. And then I go to the comic shop, I get my books, I get home, I get settled with a nice drink, and the lights are down, the candles are on. Me and these books, we're about to spend some private time together. And I read Justice League 50. And I get to the final image of Justice League 50, which was Owlman sitting on the Mobius chair and being vaporized in a thing of blue light. And I go, that kind of looks like when Dr. Manhattan vaporized Rorschach. And I stop and I go, I just start putting things together in my head. And I say out loud to myself, much like you do, I go, God damn it, Todd.
And you know what's funny? I saw the same thing that you did on the Facebook page that day, but I didn't think anything of it. I thought, oh, Todd's just adding some Watchmen stuff to the page.
Yes, but you didn't see that image that I'm talking about of Batman holding up that out round thing. So I knew it had to be round, right?
Because you explained to me that day on the phone that you had seen an image of Batman holding up a blurred thing. Now, to show you how instilled in my mind my era growing up of Batman is, I was picturing Batman carrying something like he was carrying Jason Todd's body out of what was the name of it? Of Death in the Family. Death in the Family?
Death in the Family.
Yeah, that's right.
Family, yes.
I was picturing like Jason Todd's body being blurred out or something. And so it never even crossed my mind that it would be like a small object like that. So you see the reveal, and what happened? So you pretty much figured out. But what did you make of the reveal when you finally saw it?
Yeah. So when it finally happened, I kind of knew it was coming because earlier in the book you also have the character of Pandora who gets vaporized as well in a similar fashion.
In a direct mirror of the way that Rorschach is vaporized in Watchmen.
Yes, and so when it happens, I kind of knew it was coming, but you kind of need that confirmation that they're going there, and then it came. And I instantly I looked at it and I just thought to myself, the next time there's an episode of the Little Orphan Annie radio serial, I'm just going to make sure I spoil it for Todd because I know how much he hangs on his radio serial.
Oh, that was an age joke, ladies and gentlemen, for those who may have been lost for a moment there.
If you're following along, it's a recurring theme. But anyway, no, I mean, the reveal was amazing. It was, and then the epilogue.
And then came the epilogue.
Yeah, where they directly lift dialogue from Watchmen. So if there was any doubt in your mind as to where this story eventually is going at some point in the undetermined future, they erased that with the epilogue, I would say.
Not only that, but it ties it. Okay, this is actually, I'm looking at it again, and this is actually even better than I remember it being, because it's the first thing I was going to point out is that the very first page of Rebirth shows you a watch, and Wally describes this watch that was given to him by his uncle. It belonged to his father and his grandfather before that, and on the back of it is inscribed, "Every second is a gift," and one day the watch broke. The epilogue, you see this watch, this exact same watch with the same inscription, and it's sitting on a red planet, and it's being pulled apart, seemingly by nothing, with bloodstains on it, and put back together. And you see dialogue from the character Dr. Manhattan. And it's actually the exchange between Dr. Manhattan and Ozymandias that takes place at the very end of Watchmen. I did the right thing, didn't I? It all worked out in the end. And then Dr. Manhattan responds, in the end, nothing ends, Adrian. Nothing ever ends. And then the book ends with a panel of the Doomsday Clock from Watchmen with a bloodstain on it.
And then if you turn the page, and even though it's technically an ad, that next page really tells you what's coming. And it says, it's a black and yellow spread page, and it says the clock is ticking on the DC Universe, and the clock is set at 15 minutes to midnight.
Yep. And then you turn the page from there, and you get this awesome splash page of all the DC heroes in Rebirth.
Yeah.
And they appear to be having a good time being heroes. So, it sets the stage for all these characters, all these relationships, a new era. It's in dark contrast to the sort of gritted teeth look that came in with the New 52. So, very interesting. And it essentially sets up the idea, if you couldn't follow it, that Dr. Manhattan has basically created the New 52 universe.
Yeah, I mean, that's the implication we get. And then at some point, we're going to have to get some resolution to that reveal. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little break because we are way overdue for one. And when we get back, we're going to blindly speculate about where the DC Universe might be going forward, and then hit you before the end of the show with our quick thoughts on the season finales for both The Flash and Arrow on the CW. So stay tuned and catch us on the other side of the break.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following. What's up, everybody? This is Kevin Kelly. Make sure you check out every episode of The Kevin Kelly Show right here on the Place to Be Nation. PlaceToBeNation.com. The Kevin Kelly Show. Every episode is a winner. At least we hope.
Place to Be Nation's Justin Rosero here. In addition to The Kevin Kelly Show, we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes and PlaceToBeNation.com. You can check out Scott Criscullo and me on the Mothership, the Place to Be podcast, with our famous Vintage Vault pay-per-view reviews. PTBN also covers current day wrestling with Main Event, Mission Indie Possible, and our monthly pay-per-view reaction shows with immediate feedback on WWE, NXT, and Ring of Honor Super Shows. And relive wrestling's past with our monthly pay-per-view rewind series, led by Ben Morse, and the Dangerous Alliance Wrestling podcast as we dive into various subjects in the form of exercises and games. We got sports covered too with the Sports Evolution Mega Show with Scott, Dr. G, Cowboy, and Cowboy Sr., the Kings of Sport led by Live Audio Wrestling's Godfather Nate Milton, as well as the NBA Team Podcast and the TJ McClune Show. PTBN tackles pop culture and irreverence with Richard and the Mailman, the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, and if you like a hybrid of all of this in list form, check out Jordan Duncan's Rank and File. All of these shows are available on PlaceToBeNation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus tournaments and more. We want to thank our friends at Bonehead's Wing Bar in West Warwick, Rhode Island and Fall River, Massachusetts, and Scott Keith's Blog of Doom. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlaceToBeNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
This is Parv, and I'm here to tell you to listen and subscribe to the Pro Wrestling Only Place to Be Nation podcast network. That's the PWO PTBN podcast network, where you'll find a ton of in-depth shows done by hardcore fans. We've got Chris Zellner's 1-2 punch of Exile on Bad Street, and with David Bixenspan, a smash hit Between the Sheets. We've got Wrestling Culture with Dylan Hales and Dave Musgrave, Goodwill Wrestling and the reaction shows with Good Old Will from Texas. We got This Week in Wrestling with my man Pete and Johnny Sorrow, Stephen Graham and Tim Livingston's Pro Wrestling Super Show, Tag Teams Back Again with Kelly and Marty Sleaze, and a ton of other great shows too. And of course there's Titans of Wrestling and Where the Big Boys Play with yours truly and some dude from down south called Chad. PWO PTBN Podcast Network.
My name is Barry Allen, and I am the fastest man alive. To the outside world, I'm an ordinary forensic scientist, but secretly, with the help of my friends at Star Labs, I fight crime and find other metahumans like me. I hunted down the man who killed my mother, but in doing so, I opened up our world to new threats. And I am the only one fast enough to stop them. I am the Flash.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Children, too, if you're listening, to the Hard-Traveling Fanboys Special Edition for DC Universe Rebirth #1. Unibirth or Universe, who cares? All I know is it's awesome. You got to read this comic. And we are to the point of the show where we're going to talk about what we think is next for the DC Universe, because they have set up that Ozymandias, or not Ozymandias, Dr. Manhattan is responsible for the events that led to the New 52 creation, which picks up nicely. I actually went back and reread the last chapter of Watchmen yesterday, and at the very end, Dr. Manhattan explains that he's going off to create life, and he wants to create a universe not quite as complicated as the one that he was in. So, flash forward to now. We know that Dr. Manhattan has done this. In the book, in DC Universe Rebirth, there's a character that has appeared off and on in the Superman titles since Geoff Johns had his run with John Romita Jr., and this character is called Dr. Oz.
Mr. Oz.
Mr. Oz, sorry, not Doctor. I don't want to... He didn't go through all the years of Oz Medical School to get that title, so I apologize. Mr. Oz is there. And nobody knows this for sure, but speculation is that Mr. Oz is Ozymandias, Adrian Veidt from Watchmen.
And so, just to start, do you think that the implication is that Ozymandias and Dr. Manhattan were in collusion somehow, or are you thinking that they represent opposing forces on, the creation of the New 52?
That's the big question, and there's two different ways of thinking at it. I think the clear implication that I'm getting from this anyway, and maybe I'm way off, what I believe is that I believe Ozymandias engineered the creation of the New 52 Superman, which is why he took such an interest in that particular character, how he grew and changed and all that. And I think it's interesting because one of the complaints about the New 52 Superman is that he reflected some of the ideals of the Watchmen universe, a much more jaded, much more realistic approach to comic heroes or what have you. So I feel like Ozymandias had something to do with him in particular. Now the question is are they going to flip the roles and put Ozymandias in opposition to Dr. Manhattan and put him almost in a heroic role of trying to atone for past mistakes? Or what I really think is the case is I think it's a callback to Infinite Crisis, where you had Superboy Prime being manipulated and coerced by Alexander Luthor. And I see Ozymandias in the Alexander Luthor role, and I see Dr. Manhattan as a much more advanced Superboy Prime. Now, then again, it could be a situation where Ozymandias is operating completely under the radar of Dr. Manhattan. That Manhattan did his thing and he stayed out of it, because Geoff Johns has made it clear that he refers to Dr. Manhattan not as a villain but as an antagonist, and he created a separation between those two terms. So I'm going with Ozymandias has somehow not controlled Doc Manhattan, but has manipulated him in some way through his quest for knowledge.
Right. I just question how it would be possible for a character like Dr. Manhattan to even be manipulated. Because,
well, if you remember, he pretty much gets manipulated at the end of Watchmen.
Correct, but is he not all-knowing enough that he might not fall for the same trick twice? You know what I mean? It's hard for me to buy him being worked again by Ozymandias for a second time. So I don't know. It's tough. I don't really know what to make of it right now. It's interesting. It's interesting, and I think.
Well, go out on a limb. What's your prediction?
I'm going to say that ultimately the idea for the character of Ozymandias is that he has somehow realized what Dr. Manhattan was doing, that he was keeping tabs on him some ways after the events of Watchmen, and I'm guessing that he has been secretly trying to act against Dr. Manhattan. And perhaps his involvement with Superman is because he views Superman as the most powerful force in the New 52, and perhaps he thought he would be the most useful ally against Dr. Manhattan. And wherever it goes, that's one thing I think you and we've discussed is I don't care how powerful Superman is, the conclusion of this story cannot and should not be any form of a physical confrontation between Dr. Manhattan and the heroes of the New 52. I don't think there's any way that works, personally.
No, I agree, because Dr. Manhattan cannot be beaten physically, as was established at the end of Watchmen. Do you think that this implies in any way that Adrian's plan backfired on him at the end of Watchmen? Because the last pages of Watchmen are Rorschach's journal ending up at that tabloid newspaper. Right. So theoretically, if the truth got out, all of Adrian's accomplishments would be wiped, quote-unquote accomplishments would be wiped out, and all of a sudden all these nations would know it was a fraud, and they'd go right back to war with each other. So is it possible that the Watchmen Earth has been destroyed?
Oh, that's a good point.
And perhaps, that's why we find Ozymandias and possibly Night Owl and Silk Spectre and possibly Rorschach as well.
I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Hadn't thought about the Earth destruction angle. That would make a lot of sense, though. One thing I wanted to touch on with you, though, beyond just the plot implications, it's hard not to read Rebirth as a very metatextual story because, like we discussed earlier, it's clearly almost like Geoff Johns is speaking directly to the reader, Mm-hmm. So what do you think about the idea that, in some ways, this is to be read as a complete rejection of the effect that Watchmen has had on the superhero genre, if you will?
genre. I think it is that. I think that it's not, importantly, and here's the distinction, it is not a rejection of Watchmen, I don't believe. I don't think that in any way this is a statement or a commentary on the greatness of Watchmen as a story. I think that it's evergreen. It's always going to be there. And, I've made my opinion clear many times. It's the best comic book I've ever read. But I think what this is a rejection of the impact, the unintended impact that it had on superhero comics, which Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore have both talked about, that their intention was never to encourage superhero comics to go in this dystopian direction, this kind of tearing down the hero's direction. And that's kind of what happened, for better or worse. Now, I'm not going to be a hypocrite, because most of my favorite comic book stories, most of my favorite superhero stories came out after Watchmen.
Right.
And in some way were either influenced by Watchmen or The Dark Knight from the 80s.
Say, yeah, The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen. Those are the two really, very different stories, but I think a lot of people lump them together in terms of the effect they had on the industry.
And they were made at the same time.
Yes.
They were being created at the same time in different parts of the world. And, it's just one of those crazy coincidences. And so I would argue that there were a lot of good effects that they had. I think that it caused the writing in superhero comics to become smarter, to step up and evolve. But I also think that it, in some ways, it made superhero comics not superhero comics. And in that regard, I mean that we saw for better or worse, we saw throughout the 90s, and then almost a resurgence in the 2000s, and we saw it a little bit even with Civil War, a generation of comics that was about, let's show the flaws of these heroes, and let's show these heroes doing things that aren't heroic. And let's show these heroes' personal lives in shambles, and let's show... Again, and I'm not passing judgment one way or the other, but I think that there was a clear path towards a more violent superhero genre and a less optimistic superhero genre. It became very much a genre in both Marvel and DC that was filled with perpetual Armageddon events, perpetual the world is about to be destroyed events, or the universe even. And because a lot of people count that back to Crisis, but in some ways Watchmen, I think, created this, build the suspense of the story about, will the world be destroyed forever? Will the universe be destroyed forever? And and I think at a certain point, the traditional superheroes fight the bad guys and get along for the most part. I think those days went bye-bye. And I don't think that's necessarily a horrible thing in and of itself, but it tipped the scale away from the middle and towards an extreme. And I think what this is an attack on the concept that superheroes can't be superheroes because people won't find them interesting. That idea that, well, Superman's boring. The idea that, well, Batman's predictable. The idea that you have to kill off characters, you have to do this, that, or the other in order to build suspense. And I think this is kind of going back to a more traditional approach of superheroics and saying that, look, Watchmen's great, but it's okay for superheroes to have a good time. It's okay for them to smile. It's okay for you to tell stories that don't involve, these characters going through hell all the time.
Right.
Now, I like stories where characters go through hell, but again, we've talked about this before. You have to strike a balance, and there has to be a mix of the comedic and the serious, the light and the dark, the edgy and the superheroic. And instead of trying to fit characters into realistic boxes when you're never going to have quote-unquote realistic superheroes.
I understand all that. I guess my concern is this. Written by Geoff Johns, I have no concerns whatsoever about his ability as a writer to strike that balance we talk about. My concern is with a DC editorial structure and a writer pool that may not be able to grasp that balance quite as coherently. I'll admit that and you've made fun of me for this in the past, and it's no secret that I tend to be a fan of the quote-unquote grim and gritty superhero stories. I tend to like them with a little bit darker edge to them. But I'm not saying that's appropriate for every instance. The analogy I like to use is it's just another tool in the toolbox. It should be one of many tools that are used, that you can paint with across the spectrum, in every shade, in every tone. And my concern is that this is going to be taken by a large portion of the fandom and perhaps future creators, because as we know, comic book creators are constantly influenced by the generation that came before. And my concern is that we have a generation who is coming now who is going to think that darker side of the spectrum or that entire approach to storytelling is somehow less than now. Does that make sense? I guess my concern is more not what it says about the effect that Watchmen had, but my concern is that it's going to have a negative impact on the way Watchmen itself is perceived by the comics community and by the next generation of creators. And that they're going to think that a grimmer, a darker, or more grounded approach to storytelling is wrong. And, you and I have discussed before how it's so difficult these days to find shades of gray with things. And people either want to react to things as the best thing ever or the worst thing ever. And I'm worried that this could potentially push Watchmen onto the other side of that line for a lot of people. Does that make...
Yeah, well, and you've already seen it. I've already seen it in Pockets Fall Online before this ever happened. I mean, when they came out with Dark Knight 3, I had people on my Twitter timeline talking about how Dark Knight doesn't hold up because it's basically grimdark porn or whatever the term was that they used.
The Killing Joke seems to be the one that gets it more often than Dark Knight, I would say.
I think the issues with Killing Joke are a little more complicated.
Right, of course.
But I've seen it directly with Dark Knight Returns, where people say that it doesn't hold up because it's there's no substance to it. It's just a grim and gritty story for the sake of being grim and gritty, none of which is true. But that's the narrative because it's a reaction to all the stuff that's come after it. And it's the same thing with Watchmen. You're going to have people that are going to inherently tear down Watchmen because of what the effect is that they view it had on superhero comics, which is not Watchmen's fault, by the way. And I also do think that's a very valid concern on your point, because when they went for the whole let's make everything more serious and more gritty or whatever, that was editorial edict. And the message from editorial should not be our heroes have to be
this and only this.
And only this. It should be our heroes can be anything. And that's what I think Geoff is trying to bring back, is the idea that you can have joyful heroes. You can have a Superman who acts heroic, who isn't conflicted about acting heroic, by the way, who is filled with love, a Flash who is filled with love, because Batman was successful doesn't mean every character needs to be like Batman, and hopefully that won't swing the pendulum too far in the other direction where, well, let's make Batman happy-go-lucky, and that it's different strokes for each character, and characters.
But a universe, as a universe, it should feel in balance. Is my
like my idea, and I know that this is a very violent era of DC that I'm referring to, but my ideal DC universe, my favorite DC universe, is not even the DC universe from when I was a kid. It's the DC universe that brought me back into comics in the mid-2000s.
The Infinite Crisis.
Infinite Crisis era. Everything, you had Kevin Smith and Brad Meltzer's Green Arrow, which had a very distinct tone, but it never felt out of step with Ed Brubaker and Greg Rucka's Batman, which had a very different tone. Does that make sense?
Right, yeah. No, exactly. It does.
And likewise...
that's the idea, is that in theory, you should be able to have different tones from across the spectrum that combine to form, one collage, one motif, if you will. But
And
My
you can
concern
tell
now is that you're
in a
gonna
way
only
that is distinctly DC, as opposed to stories that can be interchanged with any Spider-Man or Iron Man story. Because Iron Man is not a legacy character. Spider-Man, with the exception of Miles Morales, which is an influence from DC, has not been a legacy character. But stuff like the Batman family makes Batman unique. And the fact that we're getting a book now focusing on the family is really cool.
I agree completely. So eventually, whenever they get ready to pay this off, are you like me in that you're assuming that will be whenever Geoff Johns makes his long-awaited return to writing comics?
Yes, and I'll go one further. I hope that's the case, because I don't know who I would trust to write that story other than him right now. I think that you will see hints at it, and I think that was a big part of Geoff working with all these writers on the Rebirth titles, was making sure that there's going to be hints of this and there's going to be shades of this in the stories. But I think in general this movement is going to be more about establishing the characters, getting the characters back to their roots, and the plot will kind of take a back seat. And I think Geoff will come back in a couple years and hopefully do that. I do know that he is going to come back and co-write Rise of the Seven Seas with
Dan
Abnett. So
yeah, that's I can't wait for that whenever it comes. Whenever it may come. But we've talked about Rebirth in depth for a long time, a large portion of this podcast. So before we let you go, let's jump over to the television side and stay DC. I know Ben Morris loves it when we do all DC episodes, so we're going to keep it there, and we're going to hit you a little bit with our thoughts on the Flash and Arrow season finale. So Greg, I'll let you decide which one do we want to tackle first.
I guess we should just go chronologically. Let's start with the Flash.
All right, so Flash this week, ended up the season wrapping up the Barry and Zoom conflict. Also gave us the reveal of the Man in the Iron Mask, and also set the stage for what should be a very interesting season 3. So, Greg, why don't you take the people through, kind of what happened there on the Flash finale?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to summarize the whole episode, but basically the crux of it was, of course, Barry defeats Zoom.
Right.
The bad guy is beaten, but not until after Zoom has taken something very precious from Barry, which was his father, who he killed in the previous episode. And meanwhile, we do meet the Man in the Iron Mask, who is not Leonardo DiCaprio, but is the Earth 3 doppelganger of Henry Allen, but we find out that it is the real Jay Garrick. You see, Zoom kidnapped Jay Garrick from his Earth, couldn't steal his speed for some reason, but decided to steal his name because he wanted to feel the rush of being a hero for a change. Now the real Jay is back, and I gotta be honest, the scene when you see John Wesley Shipp step into that uniform, that Golden Age Flash uniform, it just felt right. It was one of the best moments of the season, was seeing the real Jay Garrick and see it be the Flash from the 1990 TV show, John Wesley Shipp. Really cool. And I think you and I both agree that Jay Garrick costume actually looks better than the comics Jay Garrick costume.
Completely. I actually really dug the costume they went with. The giant lightning bolt in the center kind of did it for me. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so anyway, but that's not all, because at the end of the episode, as everybody is celebrating the victory, Barry is still glumming around about what happened to his dad, and he makes a very bold decision to travel back in time. He's decided he's lost too much. He travels back through time to the moment that he's visited a couple times on the series, which is the moment when Reverse Flash kills his mom. And remember, last year in the season finale, he made the very tough decision to allow his mom to die because it was the right thing to do. Well, in this case, he says screw it, and he shows up, stops Reverse Flash, and saves his mom's life. And that's the end of the show, is Barry reuniting with his mother, saving her life from Reverse Flash, which appears as if it's going to set up the television universe version of Flashpoint.
That is certainly the implication we got. So, now that you know kind of what happened here, we'll hit you with a little bit of our thoughts in general. And I got to be honest, I don't want to be the downer of the comics community, but I was a little underwhelmed by the season finale. I thought it had some exceptionally weird character moments in there that felt out of step with the characters, and I thought the final showdown between Barry and Zoom was largely visually uninteresting. Compared to some of their previous showdowns that had the zigzagging through the streets of Central City, which always looks good no matter how many times they do it. This of them just running on the circular plane just didn't do much for me. So outside of the Jay Garrick reveal, which while I enjoyed that as well, I think we both would agree it was ultimately anticlimactic because I think everyone knew it was coming, especially after Henry's mentioning of Garrick being his mother's maiden name a few weeks back. I think we all kind of saw that coming.
Hopefully Mark Waid is off the ledge now.
Yes, hopefully Mark Waid is off the ledge. Back on the ledge, however, Alan Moore probably after the events of DC Universe Rebirth.
Yes.
But that's another topic for another time. But, yeah, I mean, I liked the episode overall, but I would say, with the exception of this year's Arrow season finale, probably the weakest DC season finale to date of the Arrowverse, I would say.
I would agree with that, and I feel bad because I know a lot of people were really excited about it. I just kind of felt like the last episode was a better finale than this one in some ways. Like if you just tacked on Zoom being defeated at the end of that episode, that would have been a perfect finale for me. This past week's episode, I agree with a lot of your reservations. I thought there were some weird character moments. I thought the fight with Zoom was not terribly interesting or well done. I hate the Deus Ex Machina of the Time Remnant. I really don't like that concept because it's something you can just abuse and it gives you a cheap out of any situation if they abuse it. I don't think they've abused it yet, but I think the potential is there to abuse it, and I don't like that concept. I think everybody is really excited about the potential for seeing Flashpoint, and I get that. It's a fun story from the comics. There's a lot of cool ramifications from that, possibly seeing different versions of the Arrow characters, the Legends of Tomorrow characters, and all that stuff. Ultimately, for me, and I go back and forth because, yes, I'm going to be totally in for Season 3. I'm really excited for it. I love the show. I think it was a great season overall. But I don't think Flashpoint is worth taking the character of Barry Allen in a backwards direction, and I feel like that's what was done in that episode.
That's my biggest issue with the decision he made at the end. The question of whether he should save his mother is a moral question and a decision that he has already made and learned to live with as a character. If anything, you would think that the death of his father would cause him to go back and take some actions to prevent just the death of his father, whether it's going back in time to stop Zoom or going back even further to possibly stop Zoom from ever coming to be on a different Earth, or however you wanted to do it. But going back to that moment from Season 1 just feels, like you said, like a step backward for the character. It feels like something he's already dealt with, and it really is frustrating in a way because the whole idea was that Barry had learned what the Flash meant to people and what the Flash was able to accomplish and create, and now it's almost like he's willingly thrown all that away.
Yeah, and the point of Flashpoint, the book, was Barry learning that lesson, that no matter what he's lost, his loss does not supersede everyone else's life. And Barry has learned that lesson already on The Flash. The entire theme of this season was one of him accepting what he can't have, what he can't change. For instance, his relationship with Patty, it ends and he has to accept it. His father dies, he has to accept it. His mother, he has to accept it. And instead, you take the entire theme of the season, and particularly the Kevin Smith directed episode 3 episodes ago, where the point was Barry coming to terms with this.
Right.
And you throw it out the window and you say, well, yeah, he lost his dad, which sucks, but he's lost his dad before. And the Barry Allen that I have known throughout the course of this series, I don't believe at this point. If this happened in season 1, absolutely he would go back and change it. But the Barry that we know now, I don't see him making that decision. I don't think it made sense. I don't think it was consistent with the Barry Allen who has made decisions throughout the prior 3 or 4 episodes.
Especially after, the last few episodes where Barry has learned that, okay, things have gone badly for him. There are some things he can't have, but he's also finally getting something he's always wanted in Iris. Mm-hmm. And particularly to go back and risk that felt very un-Barry to me.
To go back and risk changing everyone around him's lives, I don't think Barry would do that. So that's my stance on the finale. I don't think it was horrible. I thought it was underwhelming, and I am still super excited about season 3. I'm sure it's going to be great, but I was just disappointed from a character aspect because I've said many times that Barry Allen in some ways is the best character in the entire DC TV universe because of the most relatable, I'll say. Maybe not the best, but the most relatable character in the DC TV universe.
Especially when you compare it to the season 1 finale, where that was an A or an A+ episode down to a B- episode, in my opinion. So it just very disappointing given the quality of the DC season finales up until this past week.
And even the mid-season finales.
Yeah, which have all been mostly great. So with that being said, let's go now to the Arrow season finale, which... Flash was sitting there at the bottom of DC TV season finales, but luckily for it, Arrow came along the next night. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Now, for those of you that haven't read our columns in the past, Arrow is our favorite of the TV shows in general.
We are the, I won't say vast minority, but over the past 2 years, I would say the majority opinion has shifted to the Flash being most people's favorite of the DC TV shows.
Yes, but we're Arrowheads from the very beginning, and love both shows, love all 3 shows, but Arrow has been our one, and we have found ourselves in the position of defending it at times when it has been accused of bad episodes or bad seasons or whatever. We both liked season 3 a lot, which a lot of people hated. And there's just no way for me to defend this season finale. It was...
or not even the season finale, really... Like
the last half of the season.
Maybe even I was going to say the last quarter of the season, but yeah, you can make that argument about the last half of the season.
Quarter. The last half's too far. I really liked the first 3 or 4 episodes after the comeback, but the last 2-3 episodes, but in particular this finale, did not. I actually liked the previous week's episode quite a bit. The one that had was that the one that had Damien Dark's city that got basically destroyed?
Yeah, under the city, essentially.
Yes, I like that stuff. I liked the episode that introduced that and the episode that ended it. But it felt at a certain point like the show was starting to lose steam in the second half of the season.
It was spinning its wheels, and I think part of that has to do with the first 3 seasons. They never tried to have one villain for 23 episodes. And I actually like Damien Dark more than most people did. I don't think the writers, because the Arrow writers have said their approach is to, if there's a card on the table, let's go ahead and turn it over because there are always going to be more cards later. They like to go ahead and pay things off fairly quickly rather than stretching them out. And so I think when you do that, but then you try to stretch out one villain for an entire season, you can see the 2 approaches don't mesh. And so I thought at times they were spinning their wheels with Damien Dark, they were spinning their wheels with the larger conflict, and didn't really know how to handle one villain for 23 episodes.
I agree, and I think that as a result, you saw a lot of the artificial drama episodes of the ridiculous Oliver and Felicity breakup, and then tease and then stretch and then break up again and then all that stuff throughout the second half of the season.
And then you end the season with no real resolution on their on their relationship status.
They didn't even acknowledge it.
And no, I'm not saying they needed to be like, all right, we're back together, or we're never getting back together, or however they wanted to do it, but some acknowledgement of the fact that, hey, we have a complicated situation here. Are we going to work on it going forward? Are we not?
Things that we need to talk about. Right.
It. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I thought I've seen this point brought up elsewhere, and I do agree with it as well. Damien's plans did not need to involve nuking the entire world because there's a big world of the Arrowverse beyond just Star City.
Well, larger than that, the dude, like, do his plans need to involve, like, in true Dr. Evil fashion, keeping Oliver alive no less than, like, 5 or 6 times over the course of the season? I mean, every time they had an encounter, he had him in a position where he could have killed him easily and just decided to let him walk away every time. Yes, he eventually killed Laurel. Oh, sorry, which we haven't mentioned in previous shows, but at this point, whatever. You know, but letting the entirety of Team Arrow just walk away from every conflict they had just felt like a really dumb thing for a character that the writers kept telling us was ruthless, unlike any villain that we had met before.
And I always was able to chalk it up to him being really arrogant, because that's the one thing that the actor Neil McDonough put across. One of the reasons I enjoyed the character so much is he was just so – he was the first character to match Malcolm Merlyn in the smugness department, if not exceed at times. But yeah, the nukes thing got too unwieldy for me and too hard to buy, and I thought the overall plot basically of Damian kind of lost its thread there, and it's when it switched from being about saving the world in some way or rebuilding it to just destroying everything, including himself. I kind of lost. And his daughter, yeah. I lost my faith in the storyline at that point.
And also, now that we've seen it, the entire thing play out, was that flashback sequence from this season not one of the most pointless and useless things they've ever done?
So bad.
Outside of getting introducing Constantine to the universe, I would say that's the only thing to come out of that.
Yep.
The whole flashback sequence this year.
The Constantine episode was great, and that should have been the end of it. They should have ended it right there. They should have had Ryder's character get destroyed, and that should have been the end of it. But no, they kept it going, and it was the most boring thing in the world. It actually ground episodes to a halt when they would go to the flashback. And the finale, by the way, was no different, because most of my problems with the finale were not that big, except for the flashback, which was atrocious.
Yep,
because it killed the momentum of everything. Nobody, and I'll go ahead and say this, I'm fairly confident nobody cared about that lady that Oliver was helping on the island.
No.
I sure didn't. I didn't give a damn about her or her brother.
Or anyone else on the godforsaken island.
Or anyone else on the island. Or Ryder. Or Ryder could have been okay, and that gets me to my next point. Which we've already, Stephen Amell has kind of confirmed this is going to happen, but they can't get back to the street roots of Arrow quick enough for me, because the magic stuff.
But how do you even do that at this point? Because we've got an Oliver Queen now who is like well versed in using the magic of hope to protect himself, which is one of the corniest things.
Oh my God! The worst scene in the finale, other than everything on the island, the worst scene in the finale had to be Oliver's corny standing on a car and giving a speech to everyone moment.
I kept waiting for Zooey Deschanel to show up and start singing "Santa Claus is Coming to Town" like the end of Elf, because that's what it reminded me of. Yep. Let's all believe, it was so stupid.
And then when the people like throw the can at Damien Dark, like, "Hey, get out of here!" It was reminiscent actually of Superman 2, when all the townspeople try to like throw stuff at Zod and his minions, which of course doesn't have any effect because they're superpowered and the regular people aren't.
Or the scene in Spider-Man 2 where the people were throwing trash at Doc Ock. He's like, "You mess with Spider-Man, you're messing with all of us."
So what we're getting at is that every adaptation of every superhero has done that exact scene at one point or another.
And it's never good. Like, it's never been good. It's never going to be good. So just stop doing it is our point.
It's yeah, so that was bad. The actual fight between Oliver and Dark I liked a lot, although I didn't like
the first half of it until
the finish
Dark
was bad.
Snapped his fingers and people just started rushing from around the corner. So had the entire army just kind of been standing around the corner, peeking their head out periodically to see when they were supposed to hit their cue, when their music was supposed to hit.
And I loved the fight until the finish of the fight. I didn't like because the ending was basically a Rocky ending where they just traded wild right hooks with each other until eventually Dark fell.
Right.
And that's so not Arrow-like, because Arrow always does really clever fight scenes.
Great fight scenes, yep.
And I thought that one was great up until that point, and it's like you got to come up. It's like a wrestling match. It's a really good match, and then it has a crap finish. it ruins the whole thing before it in some ways. So,
and that's nothing to even talk about the character decisions that were made after that with Thea and Diggle, and like just everybody seemed to be making these really bizarre choices.
I get where they're going with these different characters. Like, Thea's didn't bother me as much as it did you. Yes, it's reminiscent of every season of Thea, basically, where she's searching for herself.
We've been there. We've done it. Do we need another plot where Thea goes globetrotting and finds some star-crossed lover, and just it turns into a really dumb, cheesy thing until Malcolm brings her back against her will? Because that's what it's going to be. That's exactly what it's going to be.
Which reminds me, Malcolm shows up in the middle of the episode to help the team out, which I actually don't have a problem with, because I thought it made perfect sense, because Malcolm, when he realized that Dark's plan was now to just destroy everyone, Malcolm is only interested in saving himself. I don't even think he's that interested in Thea. He just wants to save himself. So it made sense to me that he shows up. But then he just vanishes again, and we have no idea where he went. And by the end of the episode, he's never even referenced.
Yeah.
So he just vanishes. Diggle, I understand completely what they were going for with him, because he'd been through a lot. It made sense that he'd take time away from the team. Like you, though, I don't understand him taking time away from his family as well.
Yes, Diggle's entire emotional response to this season is born out of a place of being conflicted over the role of family in his life, because he killed his brother. I do not see the man of John Diggle. I do not see his response being leaving his wife and child, especially his wife, who is in one of the most dangerous positions of any human being on the planet, given her position as head of Argus. I do not see him leaving them to re-enlist in the military simply because he had to kill his brother. Leaving the team, yes. Leaving his wife and child, no. That speaks to me as nothing like the character of John Diggle as we've been led to believe he is.
And I briefly got my hopes up, because I was willing to overlook all the, weird disintegrating of the team or whatever, Thea going away. When it got down to Oliver, Felicity, and Diggle, and Felicity actually says, yeah, the original gangsters back together, and they do the tentative high five, I was excited. I was like, this is exactly what I wanted to see. Get back to the original three. And then Diggle left. And so now your team is basically Ollie and Felicity, which it's fine, but
which should make for some very interesting reactions from fandom over the first few episodes of next season, given the current Olicity backlash that we've discussed on previous episodes.
But basically, I am ready, willing, and 100% invested, and also Gable, by the way.
I knew that was coming.
In next season, getting back to the show's roots, because I agree with what Amel has said in interviews. The show is at its best when it's doing its own thing, when it's telling its own story, and when it's doing things at a level that is relevant to Oliver Queen and his character. Yes. Now, I some of the supernatural elements, I loved season 3, and I loved the first half of this season, but it just got too far, and it gets to a point where at a certain point, did you feel at a certain point this season that it was no longer a show about Oliver Queen at times?
Oh, absolutely. But that happens when the show's cast expands so heavily. Team Arrow had expanded to include Thea and Laurel, and so you're having all these characters you've got to juggle.
Roy.
Yeah. So it I felt like that, and I'm hoping that at least over the first half of next season, or maybe even the first 5 or 6 episodes, it'll be back to basics, and it'll be back to this is Ollie, and this is what is going on in his life right now. And hopefully, whether it winds up the way we want it to wind up, or whether it winds up the way a lot of other people want it to wind up, at least some kind of resolution for the time being on Oliver and Felicity. Because you can't just leave it there unaddressed. That isn't going to work.
I agree. I want to see that, and I want to, I would love to see them together, obviously, but mainly, I want to see the show tell some stories, and it would be nice to also see a few episodes anyway where Oliver is actually good at his job, where they go out and they stop crime for a few weeks without having, the weight of the world on their shoulders. And then you introduce the new big bad and all that stuff. So, I want to see get it back down to the great fight scenes where there wasn't really a need for amazing special effects because everything was street level. guys shooting arrows at each other, guns versus arrows, stuff like that. So right. I'm looking forward to that. I'm optimistic about next season. I loved the first 3.5 seasons of the show. So I'm really hoping that they can get it together next year and get back to what we're used to from Arrow.
That is my hope as well. But we'll have to wait and see. So I think that about does it with our thoughts on the events of the past week, all the things that dropped. If that wasn't enough of a reaction show for you, good news, because next week we're coming back with another edition of The Rundown, where you might say to yourself right now, well, you guys just hit all the current events that are important, didn't you? No.
Not even close.
Not even close. This has been one of the most jam-packed months in the history of comics news that I can recall, and so we got tons of stuff to talk about, including something we thought about addressing on this podcast. We're going to save it for next week, the current Captain America controversy, if you're not aware of what's going on with that one. So we got tons to cover next week in The Rundown, and then in 2 weeks' time, we're coming back with, as Greg mentioned earlier, a long book hunt focusing on Green Lantern Rebirth. And we got
something of a sacred cow for us.
Very much a sacred cow. We got a guest, right, lined up for that one, Greg?
That's right. Jennifer Smith will be joining us. She has recently read that book for the very first time. We, of course, have read it numerous times over the last 10 or 12 years, and it'll be an interesting conversation between a newcomer to the Green Lantern mythos and two old fogies like us. So
absolutely, we can't wait for that one. And then we got some other shows coming up next month as well, including, don't forget, at the end of June, the first ever Hard-Traveling Fanboys podcast, giant size. That's right, we're giant sized and we're hard.
That's right. You won't believe it when you see our giant-sized man thing. That's number right. One, I mean, from 1974, I believe.
And we will show it off in all its glory.
That's right. And it's gonna be special. Do we want to go ahead and tell them what it's gonna be?
Why not?
We are bringing back that long-running Place to Be Nation tradition of the halfies.
That's right. You're going to see our giant-sized, hard-traveling halfies.
That's right. Now, the halfies are our clever term for the half-year awards in the world of comics. We've been doing this every year since 2014, and this has been quite a half year for comics. So thankfully we got DC Rebirth in, and we're gonna be recording that here in the next few weeks, and we'll actually be adding a new member to our panel if all works out as well. But we'll wait until closer to the time to get into all that. But we've got that coming. We've also
got. I believe that show will actually feature the next installment of Tim Capel's X-Men pitch, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's what it's going to be. Absolutely. That's why we're having Tim on. We want to talk more about the X-Men pitch. We also are going to be having at some point soon a countdown of our favorite comic book scores and theme songs, which will feature the illustrious Glenn Butler. So that'll be cool. And at some point, we are going to go off the page to talk about 2000's X-Men, and that'll be coming down the way as well.
So yeah, lots of good stuff coming up in the following weeks, and you will find it all right here on the brand new Place to Be Nation Pop feed.
That's Pop. That's right. Now this is not the same Pop that people are not watching Impact Wrestling on right now. This is a different Pop. So we hope you'll enjoy it. It'll be a place for you to go, for the wrestling folks to kind of get away from our madness for a little while, for the people that aren't so interested in wrestling to listen to all of our pop culture podcasts, whether it be sports, music, gaming, whatever. We'll have you covered, but particularly comics. We're doing pretty good with our comics output, which reminds me, go to Facebook and like our page, Place to Be Nation Comics. We have conversations there, talk about all the new goings on in the world of comics, and you can also follow us on Twitter. I am at G Phillips, GPHILLIPS 8652. Nick Duke is at Nick Duke 87, NICKDUKE 87. So be sure to follow us and hit us up and let us know your thoughts on DC Rebirth.
Absolutely. Or any other, the season finales that we discussed. And if you have any ideas for shows that you want to see, in the near future, let us know. We got.
We're always looking for new content.
We're always willing to take suggestions that we can ignore. So,
and while I'm thinking about it, I can't believe I almost forgot. A couple podcasts ago, when we reviewed the book Civil War by Mark Miller and Steve McNiven, there was a mystery in that episode that was actually solved on the PTBN Comics Facebook page by our good friend Tim Capel. As you may recall, Nick and I were quite confused and befuddled by the costume of one Yellow Jacket, Hank Pym, because he had these giant circular, disc things on his shoulders.
Right.
And we couldn't figure out for the life of us what those were or what they were supposed to be. And Tim Capel solved the mystery. They're actually vibrators. So if you want to find out more about why Yellow Jacket had vibrators on his shoulders, please hit up Tim Capel and in our Facebook page, and he'll tell you all about it.
Yes, Tim is an expert on the ways of vibrators. He can tell you all about them. So
he's also an expert in the ways of pretty much everything, because he is the foremost, I consider him the foremost X-Men expert that I know, and also the foremost, for me, Marvel history expert that I know. He knows way more than Nick and I about it. So we're going to have him on here pretty soon to chat about something. Maybe we should have him on for the X-Men podcast, actually.
Interesting. I'll take that under advisement.
All right, folks. Well, we hope you've enjoyed the romp-em, stomp-em affair, as Vince McMahon would call it in the mid-'90s, that has been this incredibly long Hard-Traveling Fanboys special edition. Go out, buy DC Rebirth, give it a read, and formulate your own thoughts on it. We hope you've enjoyed it. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Hard-Traveling Fanboys.
Thanks, everybody.